There is a car sitting in a private collection right now that most people would walk straight past. No chrome fangs. No aggressive lines. Just a small, rounded, almost comical little sedan that looks like it wandered out of a cartoon. And if you didn't know better, you'd never guess that this one car, this exact model, is the reason a certain Swedish car brand became a byword for safety, not marketing. Not a slogan somebody dreamed up in a boardroom. A car. This is the story of the Volvo PV444. And I promise you, by the end of this, you will never look at a modern Volvo commercial the same way again. Let's go back. 1943. Europe is on fire. Most of the continent is a battlefield, and every major car manufacturer that could still function was building tanks, trucks, engines for the war effort. Sweden, officially neutral, was surrounded by chaos on every side, cut off from normal trade, rationing materials, just like everyone else. And in the middle of that uncertainty, a small design team inside Volvo made a decision that, frankly, sounds almost reckless in hindsight. They decided to build a brand new small car, from scratch. In the middle of a world war. The man leading the charge was an engineer named Helmer Pettersson, working alongside another engineer, Eric Jern, and a team of roughly 40 designers and technicians. 40 people, quietly working through 1943, sketching, testing, arguing over blueprints, while the rest of the world burned. That alone should tell you something about how much this car mattered to them. And here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't going to be another version of what Volvo already had. This was going to be something genuinely different for the company. Their first car with a self-supporting body, no separate chassis underneath. The body itself would be the structure. Sounds simple today. Back then, for Volvo, it was completely uncharted territory, and nobody in the company had ever engineered a car this way before. So what did they do? They didn't guess. They went out and bought a 1939 Hanomag, a German-built car, specifically because German manufacturers already had real experience building cars this way. Think about that for a second. In the middle of a war against Germany, Swedish engineers were quietly studying a German car, piece by piece, just to understand how to build their own vehicle safer and stronger. That's not a detail you'll find in a glossy brochure. That's the real story, and it's the kind of detail that gets lost the moment a company becomes a global brand. By September of 1944, in the middle of a war that hadn't even ended yet, Volvo unveiled this new car at an exhibition in Stockholm. They called it the PV444, and the name itself was a small mystery for decades. Officially, PV stood simply for Personvagn, Swedish for passenger car. But unofficially, people believed the 444 stood for 4 cylinders, 40 horsepower, and 4 seats. A little code hidden inside the name of the car itself. The price was set at 4,800 Swedish krona. That number wasn't random either. It was deliberately set to match the price of Volvo's very first car ever built, back in 1927. This was Volvo telling the Swedish public something without saying it outright. We are starting over, and we want everyone to be able to afford this new beginning. And people responded. Almost immediately, around 2,300 advance orders came in. In a country still living under wartime restrictions, that's not a small number. That's genuine hunger for hope. In fact, Volvo's own customer magazine at the time, a publication called Ratten, gave the car a nickname that tells you everything about the emotional weight it carried. They referred to the PV444, alongside another model called the PV60, as Volvo's doves of peace. Think about that phrase for a second. Not the fast car, not the stylish car. The dove of peace. A car introduced as a symbol that the world was about to get better, at a moment when nobody could say for certain that it would. But here's the part that separates the PV444 from every other feel-good story from that era. It wasn't just a symbol. It was quietly loaded with engineering decisions that had almost nothing to do with performance and everything to do with keeping the people inside it alive. Remember that self-supporting unibody body we talked about? That wasn't just a manufacturing shortcut. Compared to the old separate chassis design most cars used at the time, a unibody structure could absorb and distribute impact forces differently across the whole car. It was a genuine step forward in how a car protected its occupants, decades before crash structure was even a phrase anyone used in a showroom. And then there was the windscreen. The PV444 used a split windscreen, two separate panes instead of one big sheet of glass. On paper, that sounds like a cost-cutting compromise. But both panes were made of laminated glass. At a time when most cars on the road still used standard glass that shattered into razor-sharp shards on impact, Volvo quietly built in a windshield, designed specifically to reduce the risk of injury from broken glass. Nobody was advertising this loudly. It was just there, built in, waiting to matter, the very first time a driver needed it to. But here's the twist nobody expects. Despite the huge demand, despite the buzz, despite thousands of advance orders sitting on Volvo's desk, the car everyone wanted didn't actually reach customers for years. The gap between promise and reality stretched out for 3 long years, 1944 to 1947. 3 years of a company trying to figure out how to actually manufacture something this ambitious, in a country still recovering from wartime shortages, with limited raw materials and limited machinery. And even after production began in 1947, real mass production, the kind where the PV444 actually started rolling out in serious numbers, didn't begin until September of 1950. 6 years after that first announcement in Stockholm. Now, before we go further, if you're finding this as fascinating as I think you will, do me a favor and hit subscribe. This channel exists to dig up the real, researched history behind the machines that shaped the 20th century. No fluff, no guesswork, just the facts as they actually happened. And if something in this video sticks with you, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. So, 1950, the PV444B rolls out, and this is where things start to get genuinely groundbreaking. For the first time in Volvo's history, the company introduced 2-point seatbelts as an option. Sit with that for a second. In 1950, most manufacturers on Earth weren't thinking about seatbelts at all. Volvo was already building the earliest version of the safety system that would, decades later, become mandatory in every car on the planet. And it wasn't just about belts. That same generation of car introduced something almost nobody talks about. For the first time, the bare metal bodies were dipped and rotated through a phosphate bath during production, specifically to fight rust from the inside out. It sounds unglamorous. It is unglamorous. But rust was one of the biggest silent killers of cars in that era, weakening structures over years until a crash that should have been survivable simply wasn't. Volvo was thinking about safety in places nobody else was even looking. There was also a strange little detail from 1950 worth mentioning, because it shows Volvo wasn't perfect. They were experimenting in real time. They fitted a rooftop light, blue in the middle, orange on the sides, meant to act as a long-distance direction indicator. It sounded clever on paper. In practice, it disrupted the car's aerodynamics and got in the way of roof racks, which were hugely popular at the time. Volvo scrapped the idea almost as fast as they'd introduced it, and moved to side indicators built into the body instead. A small failure, quietly corrected. That's engineering. That's how real progress actually looks, messy and adjusted in real time, not some polished myth told years later. By 1955, the PV444 crossed the Atlantic for the very first time, Volvo's first ever export to the United States. It didn't launch nationwide. It started small, quietly introduced to customers in Texas and Southern California, and the response was modest at first. Not a lot of people bought one, in a market completely dominated by enormous, chrome-heavy American sedans. But the ones who did buy one loved it, and here's a number that should stop you in your tracks. In 1957, independent testing recorded the PV444, averaging 25 miles per gallon. 25. At a time when the average American car on the road was getting roughly 12 miles per gallon, half the fuel economy of what Detroit was building, wrapped inside a car that looked almost quaint next to the giants rolling off American assembly lines. Word started to spread. This wasn't just a safe car. It was a smart one. To sweeten the deal for American drivers who wanted a little more punch, Volvo fitted twin side draft SU carburetors, pushing output up to around 70 horsepower for the US market. Not a rocket by any stretch, but enough to satisfy customers used to a certain amount of get up and go, without abandoning the fuel efficiency that was quietly becoming the car's secret weapon. And Volvo did something else during this period that almost nobody remembers today. They created what became known as the European Delivery Program. American customers could actually travel to Sweden, pick up their brand new car directly from the factory floor in Gothenburg, and drive it across Europe before finally shipping it home. Imagine that. Buying a car not from a dealership lot, but by walking into the very building where it was born. For California customers who took part in this program, there was even a rarer, less expensive version of the car available, fitted with a smaller 51 horsepower engine. A little piece of Volvo history that only a handful of American owners ever actually experienced firsthand. By 1956, the momentum had become impossible to ignore. Volvo had become the second largest import brand in the entire state of California. Second, behind a company most people had heard of for decades, and ahead of nearly every other European manufacturer trying to break into the American market at the same time. A small, oddly shaped Swedish sedan, built during a world war, was now genuinely competing on American soil. Now here comes the part where the PV444 stopped being just a smart little economy car and started becoming something closer to a legend. 1958. Volvo updated the car, widened the rear seat, gave it a one-piece windscreen instead of the old split design, and renamed it the PV544. Mechanically, the heart of the car stayed remarkably similar, but this updated version carried something forward that would change automotive history forever. The PV544 became the platform Volvo used to introduce the world's first production three-point seatbelt. Think about what that actually means. The three-point belt, the exact design still buckled across your chest and lap in every single car built today, traces its roots directly back to this unassuming little Swedish sedan. Not a supercar. Not a luxury flagship. A humble, slightly awkward-looking family car that most manufacturers of the era would have dismissed as an economy afterthought. And Volvo went further still. The same generation of car became the development ground for something else almost nobody credits it for. The earliest work on rear-facing child car seats, designed specifically to protect the smallest and most vulnerable passengers in the vehicle, at a time when the very idea of a dedicated child restraint barely existed anywhere in the industry. That three-point belt alone has since been credited with saving well over 1 million lives worldwide, not a marketing estimate. A real, documented, patented invention that quietly became one of the most significant safety devices in the entire history of the automobile. And it started right here, in a car most people today wouldn't even recognize. And Volvo didn't just quietly install this and hope people noticed. They proved it, publicly, dramatically. In 1961, at a safety conference held in Germany, Volvo deliberately rolled one of these humpback PV cars over, right in front of an audience. The car flipped, the structure held, and the driver climbed out completely unharmed. No stunt double illusion, no camera trick. A real rollover, survived, on camera, in front of witnesses who came specifically to judge whether Volvo's safety claims were real or marketing nonsense. That single demonstration did more for Volvo's reputation than a decade of advertising ever could have. But this wasn't a car that only survived crashes in a controlled demonstration. It proved itself somewhere far less forgiving, on real roads, in real competition, in the brutal cold of Scandinavian rally racing. The same four-cylinder B14 engine that pulled families to church on Sunday mornings was also getting thrown sideways through ice and snow in genuine rally events across the region, and it held up. Not because it was fragile and got lucky, but because underneath that ordinary-looking body was a structure engineers had genuinely obsessed over. A car doesn't survive rally punishment by accident. and it certainly doesn't survive it by cutting corners. Here's where the story gets almost poetic, if you think about it the right way. In 1956, Volvo launched a brand new model called the Amazon, sleeker, more modern, clearly the future of the brand. And almost everyone assumed the old PV, with its rounded, slightly old-fashioned styling, was finished. Done. A relic about to be quietly phased out. It wasn't. The PV444 and PV544 kept selling, kept winning loyal customers, kept proving itself on rally stages and highways alike, all the way through most of the 1960s, right up until 1966, 10 years past the point when everyone assumed it was obsolete. Why? Because reputation, real reputation, earned through actual survived crashes and actual satisfied owners, doesn't disappear just because a shinier model shows up in the showroom next to it. People trusted this car with their families. That trust doesn't get replaced by a new paint job. And that trust had real numbers behind it too. What began as a modest production plan for around 8,000 units eventually turned into nearly 200,000 PV444s built before the model transitioned into the PV544. 200,000 families across Sweden, across Europe, eventually across the United States, who chose this unassuming little car specifically because it did something almost nobody else was doing at the time. It treated their safety as the whole point, not an afterthought bolted on at the end. And that philosophy never actually stopped. By 1976, more than a decade after the last PV rolled off the line, Volvo was formally recognized as a benchmark for safety, following a series of crash tests conducted in the United States. That recognition didn't appear out of nowhere. It was the direct continuation of a promise this exact car had already been quietly keeping since 1950. So here's the truth this story leaves us with. Every time you see a modern Volvo commercial talk about safety, every time you hear that name and immediately think reliable, safe, built to protect you, that association didn't come from a marketing department dreaming up a slogan in a glass office. It came from this. From a small, oddly shaped, unglamorous car developed in secret during a world war, tested against a German competitor just to learn how to build it right, fitted with laminated glass and early seatbelts nobody else was offering, and finally proven, in front of a live audience, by rolling over and walking away. If you grew up in an era when a safe car simply meant a car that hadn't broken down on you yet, this story matters more than you might expect. The PV444 is one of the real reasons that definition changed. It's one of the quiet, stubborn reasons your family's cars got safer, decade after decade, long after this odd little Swedish sedan stopped rolling off the production line. That's the real lesson here. Reputation built on substance outlasts every trend that tries to replace it. The flashy new model can launch next door in the showroom. The world can move on to sleeker shapes and bigger engines. But if you build something honest, something that actually protects the people inside it, and you prove it, publicly, undeniably, in front of witnesses who came ready to doubt you, people remember. For decades, for generations, long enough that a company can still trade on that trust nearly a century later. If this story stuck with you, do something for me. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because there are dozens of stories just like this one waiting to be told properly, with real research, not guesswork. Drop a comment and tell me the one detail from this video that surprised you the most, whether it was that rooftop light experiment, the German car they bought just to study, the European delivery program in Gothenburg, or that rollover demonstration in 1961. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and if you know someone who'd appreciate a story like this, an old Volvo owner, a car history buff, someone who remembers these cars firsthand, send it their way. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.